Imagine waking up one frozen morning to find the entire world swallowed by an endless, suffocating blanket of blinding white. The air bites so viciously that every breath feels like swallowing thousands of tiny glass shards. The wind doesn't just blow, it screams, a wild, almost human wail that echoes through the bare trees and rattles your very bones. This was the terrifying reality that descended upon the remote Sierra Nevada mountains in the late 1800s, right along the rugged border between California and Nevada. In this unforgiving wilderness, a solitary Norwegian immigrant named John Snowshoe Thompson was quietly working on something that convinced every single one of his hardscrabble neighbors he had finally lost his mind. While the other settlers, gold seekers, ranchers, miners, hurried to throw up low, squat, heavily timbered cabins meant to hunker low against the roaring gales, John was painstakingly constructing something entirely different, something that looked ridiculous, even dangerous in their eyes. He wasn't just building another cabin, he was erecting what the locals mockingly nicknamed his double cabin, a strange, tall, two-story wooden structure with unusually thick walls, a massively reinforced middle floor that could bear enormous weight, and a gigantic stone hearth and chimney system far larger than any sensible bachelor would ever need. To the people of the valley, this project seemed like pure madness, a colossal waste of precious lumber, nails, and, most critically, time. Winter was already breathing down their necks. The sky had taken on that deep, bruised purple color that every mountain dweller recognized as the prelude to something truly vicious. Riders would trot past John's worksite on their sturdy horses, shouting good-natured, and sometimes not-so-good-natured jokes. "Hey, Snowshoe, building a lighthouse for ships lost in the pines? Or gonna signal the moon when the snow gets deep?" They laughed heartily at the way he spent endless hours carefully bracing the upper roof beams, planing logs to perfect fit, and testing load-bearing points, instead of doing the practical things, stocking mountains of salted venison, smoked fish, dried beans, and firewood like everyone else was frantically doing. But John Thompson ignored the laughter completely. He had spent his boyhood and young manhood in the towering, snow-buried mountains of Norway. He had seen winters that buried entire villages. He understood something fundamental about snow that these optimistic California gold rush transplants had not yet learned through bitter experience. When the Sierra sky finally tore open, it didn't send gentle flurries. It delivered a white avalanche capable of burying a house to its eaves in days. In John's mind, his peculiar double cabin wasn't eccentric at all. It was the only rational defense against becoming another frozen corpse waiting for the spring thaw to reveal its bones. Weeks slipped by, and the air grew heavier, thicker with unspoken dread. The deer, bears, squirrels, and birds all vanished into hidden burrows and hollows, leaving behind an eerie, expectant silence that pressed down on the mountain pass like a physical weight. Down the trail, about 3 miles away, the Miller family and their neighbors were cramming every crack and crevice of their low-roofed log homes with straw, old blankets, and mud to keep out the killing drafts. They glanced up toward John's oddly tall silhouette against the darkening sky and shook their heads. "That fool's house is going to catch every gust like a sail," they muttered. "First big blow and those high walls will snap like matchsticks." John, meanwhile, kept working methodically. He dragged enormous logs up makeshift ramps, hammered iron braces, and, most strangely of all, created a second, elevated entrance nearly 10 feet off the ground, with a heavy trapdoor and ladder system inside. To anyone who had never witnessed 30 feet of snow fall in a single ferocious week, this upper doorway looked like the height of lunacy. But John understood fluid dynamics in a practical, life-or-death way. He knew cold air sinks relentlessly while warm air rises. He knew snow settles, compacts, and builds pressure capable of collapsing any ordinary roof. So he designed not just a house, but a vertical survival fortress, a warm, elevated pod disguised as a simple frontier cabin. The massive stone hearth on the second level would trap heat where people actually lived. The reinforced middle floor would distribute the crushing weight of any snow load that reached that high. And that upper door? That was his escape hatch when, not if, the ground floor vanished beneath 20 or 30 feet of white death. By the time the first fat, heavy flakes began drifting down, the mood in the scattered valley had shifted. The outright mockery had quieted into a nervous, watchful tension. Yet some still called him the double cabin fool as he hauled the very last loads of split, bone-dry firewood up into the spacious upper loft he had carefully pre-provisioned. Then the wind truly woke. It rose from a low moan to a full-throated scream that clawed at every shutter and plank. The temperature plunged so violently that the nearby creek froze solid within hours, its rushing water silenced under glittering ease. Families retreated inside, barred their doors, lit their fires, and told themselves they were ready. They were not. What arrived next was no ordinary Sierra storm. Historians would later call it the Great 7-Day Blizzard, a merciless, unrelenting monster that turned the mountains into an alien, frozen hellscape. As John climbed the sturdy ladder into his upper living quarters, barred the heavy inner door, and looked out through the small, thick-glassed window, he saw the last faint orange glows of his neighbors' chimneys flickering in the growing dark. He wondered grimly how many would still be burning by morning. The first night brought 3 feet of wet, heavy snow. The second night dumped 5 more on top, and that was only the gentle beginning. By day 3, the recognizable world had disappeared. A blinding, suffocating wall of white erased every landmark. Visibility dropped to 0. You literally could not see your own outstretched hand. Down in the valley, entire families were now trapped inside their homes. Snow piled relentlessly against doors until they could no longer be opened. Cabins became dark, freezing tombs. Desperate residents tried to dig tunnels outward, but each shovelful risked extinguishing their only source of heat and light. Roofs groaned, cracked, popped like gunshots under thousands of pounds of accumulated snow. Meanwhile, inside John's double cabin, a completely different reality unfolded. As the drifts climbed past 5 feet, then 10, John calmly moved his entire life upstairs. Everything he needed, food, water barrels, tools, blankets, lamps, dry clothing, and stacks of split wood, was already waiting in the loft. While his neighbors fought for every breath in smoke-filled darkness below the surface, John sat comfortably beside his elevated stone hearth. The heat rose naturally and stayed trapped in the living space. The cold floor below acted as a buffer zone. His strange house revealed its true genius. It was never meant to fight the snow. It was designed to rise above it. By day 5, some drifts towered 25 feet high, tall enough to completely bury an ordinary 2-story building. From a distance, John's cabin was nothing more than a small wooden island protruding from a vast, rolling white ocean. But inside that tiny peak, he was warm, fed, and most importantly, mobile. He knew the silence from the valley was a death knell. Blocked chimneys meant carbon monoxide buildup or no fire at all. Collapsing roofs meant crushed families. He could have stayed safe. Instead, he chose otherwise. Strapping on his homemade snowshoes, long, elegant wooden skis he had crafted himself, John stepped out through the upper door onto the hard crust of the snowpack. The wind nearly knocked him flat. The cold burned exposed skin like fire, but he pushed forward. He glided over what had once been treetops. Only the uppermost branches of the tallest pines broke the surface. Reaching where the Miller cabin should have stood, he found only a smooth, unbroken mound. No smoke, no tracks, no sign of life. Heart pounding, he began to dig furiously with the broad wooden spade he had strapped to his back. After long, exhausting minutes, his blade struck something solid, the top of their chimney. He dropped to his knees, cleared the soot-clogged opening, and shouted down into the darkness. A faint, hoarse cry answered, weak but alive. The Millers were trapped in freezing blackness. Their fire had died when snow sealed the chimney. Hypothermia was setting in fast. For the next 48 hours, John became a one-man mountain rescue operation. Skiing back and forth through blinding whiteout conditions, battling gale-force winds and sub-zero cold, he ferried firewood, blankets, smoked meat, candles, and simple instructions from his well-stocked loft. He taught the survivors how to carve narrow air shafts upward to prevent suffocation, how to use snow blocks as insulation instead of fighting them, how to ration body heat. One by one, hands reached up from holes in the snow, hands that once waved in mockery, now grasping his in desperate gratitude. faces streaked with tears, shame, and overwhelming relief. John never once mentioned the jokes. He simply worked until his own body trembled on the edge of the collapse. On the seventh day, the storm finally broke. A pale, watery sun appeared. The landscape had been utterly remade. Hundreds of dead cattle, collapsed barns, vanished trails. Yet in John's small valley circle, not one human life was lost. Word of the double-cabin fool who became a savior spread like wildfire. John Snowshoe Thompson became a living legend. For the next 20 years, he carried the U.S. mail across the Sierra Nevada mountains on those same long skis, 90-pound packs through storms that stopped trains and stagecoaches, becoming the most famous snowshoer in American history. He never demanded payment. The government often forgot to pay him anyway. He did it because no one else could. His odd double